talk about anything else.
We don't want to know.
We're dedicated, yes,
to our favorite shows.
Oh, my circuits.
Everybody loves Hippo Toad.
Scary Dog.
Blurson at Blursville.
Futurama.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of TV Party Tonight here on the Radulich in Broadcasting Network. I am your host, the mandated reporter, and frankly, I'm mortified, Mr. Mark Radulich. And tonight, our favorite show, for the first time, for the last time, is Orange is the New Black, Season 7, which made its debut on Netflix, its final bow, July 26, 2019. I stayed up all night to watch this. I couldn't stop myself. I was an addict. An addict, sir. Yeah, I came home from going to see, to let you know when I watched this, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and I sent my wife to bed, and I camped out on the couch, and I couldn't pull myself away from this thing. Now, you might think, oh, he must have loved it. Let's not get crazy. Speaking of crazy, here he is, folks, my partner in crime on this here TV Party tonight. Normally, he's the opposite attorney for me on trial, but tonight, he's just kicking back and watching a little TV with me and having a party. Ladies and gentlemen, he's Sean, you're not.
Oh, speaking of crazy, here's Sean. May all your bacon burn.
I am the king of the sideways segue. That's what I like to be.
Well, you know what? I was a very different person when we first started reviewing this show once a year, 7 years ago. We have come a long way since then. Unfortunately, the show kind of went a really long way in one direction, and then it kind of gradually reversed course and went a long, long way in the other one.
Yeah. So, Season 6 ended with Piper being released from prison. I believe it was Blanca who thought she was being released early, but turns out was being re-detained in an immigration center. Her green card, I guess, had been revoked is what happened. Because I remember this now. Her green card had been revoked because she caught new charges due to the riots, which violated her immigration status. The two sisters killed each other, so they're obviously not part of this season. And there was peace in the prison, as much as peace, can be had. Beyond that, I don't recall a whole lot else leading into Season 7. The big one was Piper being released and what will become of Piper now. And so, Season 7, the three big arcs are Life on the Outside, the adjustment, how Piper deals with that. There's the immigration angle, which deals with Blanca and the return of Maritza, good old Diane Guerrero, of Doom Patrol fame. If you haven't seen Doom Patrol, you should absolutely check it out. She's amazing on that show. And then lastly, there's the stuff in the prison, which there are a few kind of mini arcs in there, but I think like the big one deals with Daya, and then by extension her mother, and the drug trade going on there. There's some superfluous stuff dealing with the guards and Joe and the change in wardens, but we'll get to all of that. Let's talk about Piper to start with. I'm gonna just go ahead and tell you exactly how I feel, and then we'll kick this around for a little bit. I really hoped, because I actually read the book by the original, by the person who this show is based on, Piper Kerman's memoir, Orange is the New Black. I read it around the time that I discovered the show, and she talks about how she became like an advocate for prison rights or whatever. I kind of thought that's where this was going to go, that Piper would be motivated to really give of herself and use the experience in prison to become an activist. Instead, and after really, I think, evolving in the last season, I thought she regressed a lot as a character. I thought this was a lot of Season 1 Piper and not enough of Season 6 Piper. And it's, I think I might have even texted you or somebody about midway through where she gets high and she nearly gets violated. I was like, I'm halfway through the season, I'm already done with Piper. She turns it around and it gets a little bit better. But overall, I thought, as far as telling an interesting story about somebody readjusting to life on the outside. I don't think they really accomplished that as well as they could have with the Piper character.
Now at the end of the series, I've said all along that one of the weird things that Genji Cohen seems to love is creating some degree or another of detestable main protagonist, main focal character. If anything, I think it's kind of that Meg Griffin thing, where when you do that, everybody else around them kind of becomes that much more endearing and magnetic by comparison. It's kind of like how if you watch enough Weeds, past a certain point, you stop rooting for Nancy. You give up on that entirely. And instead, you kind of just want reality to smack Andy upside the head with a cinder block so he will realize, oh, Bubby, you could do so much better. And for that matter, so could your brother probably. Glow seems to have avoided that so far. Yeah, which I know that's not the show we're talking about, but I'm kind of are you kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop with that, like I am?
Well, I was going to say Ruth, and I don't want to get too much into Glow, but I had been comparing the three with somebody else, and I said Ruth is far and away the most likable of the three leads from from Weeds to Orange to Glow. But then there's Debbie, and it's kind of Genji Cohen took the approach of I still want terrible women, but I'll split them in half, and I'll make the bad part Debbie and the good part Ruth, and then you'll have to find out. You'll have to find out in our next show how successful that was in the third season. But other than Ruth just being awkward and overacting at times as the character, I'm not blaming Alison Brie on that. No, Ruth is by far the most likable. Piper and Nancy were kind of in a horse race for who could be the most detestable.
Yeah. And as far as Ruth goes, I chalk that up to the fact that I think it's patently impossible to dislike Alison Brie for any extended period of time.
Wait till the final episode of the third season of Glow, and then come back to me with that.
Allow me to remind you, I've watched nearly every season of Community.
Oh, okay. I have not, so I can't compare.
Yeah, exactly. But that's the function she serves. And get ready, guys, because this is get your beverages ready, because I'm about to kick off our first, but not my last, wrestling reference of the show. So if you're playing the drinking game, and that's why Piper has the makings of a great heel. She's somebody that is so patently unlikable. You can pair her with anyone, and they're going to come across looking fan-fucking-tastic. More often than not. Because, let's face it, nobody's nominating Alex Voss for sainthood either. Alex has fucked up plenty. It's just that the problem is, at a certain point, Piper also becomes not so much a person that things happen to as a thing that repeatedly happens to Alex. Basically, it's like Alex is Jesse Pinkman and Piper doesn't even realize that she's Walter White. She's just this hapless, bumbling, two-legged calamity. But credit where it's due. Yeah, they do kind of pull it together. They do continue the redemptive arc where prison somehow has managed to help her turn a positive corner in her life. Which is great. And she becomes a bit of a window into just how stacked the correction system is against inmates trying to turn their lives around. And, well, okay, now, And here's one where I need to ask you, okay, does this shit actually happen? About a couple things. First off, the whole thing where inmates have to pay for their own drug testing.
Yep.
You're kidding. That's actually a thing?
Yep.
Holy shit.
You're charged while you're in jail. Yeah, should you ever have the poor fortune of being arrested, if you're there for any length of time, there are certain services the jail provides that you just get billed for.
Holy shit. Okay, and I'm prepared for a yes on this one. Because I do have a question related. It's not necessarily a strict yes or no, per se. But the whole thing where she goes to her parole officer and says, I got a job offer from this really great restaurant that's better than the one I'm working at. But they close at this time, and my curfew's at this time. And how she goes in there and says, and I could also get a job at this restaurant easily, but they serve alcohol. Is there really, no wiggle room in the system where a PO can kind of look at something and say, look, yeah, technically this is a violation, but it would get you back on your feet that much faster?
Depends. Some of them are as concrete as the woman playing her parole officer was, where it's like, no, these are the rules, follow them. And there's a reason they do that. There were rules before you went to prison and you broke them anyway. So it's kind of like, holding people who are chronically unaccountable accountable is part of it. Some of it's just, these are the rules and fuck you. I've always felt like the parole system was sort of stacked against the parolee as a setup to, here, more of the probation thing is a little side rant here, but if you should ever get arrested for doing a crime and you're offered probation over having to stay in jail and you think probation is the easy road, it isn't. Yes, you get out again, but you have to pay so many fees and you have to follow so many rules, and they can violate you for just about anything, and then you go to prison for violation of probation.
See, and then there's just the whole entirely hapless, heartbreaking moment where her PO just happens to, not really trying to fuck with her per se, but just happens to stop by for the standard surprise check-in visit.
Right.
The Real Housewives of upstate New York happen to all be there. They finally get wind that she's a former felon, and they just skedaddle.
Yeah.
That broke my heart, because that's one where, yeah, I get to some extent, if you break the law, there are consequences, and you should probably think about both what you know and what you don't know before you decide to do said illegal thing. But in that case, that's one where it's like if this were a sitcom, there'd be a moment where she would just probably just look up to the heavens and just say, "Really?"
To fully answer your question, there are some POs though that will give you some leeway. Mm-hmm. There are some where if you said, "I can get a job at this restaurant that I can pay rent with and everything, but it requires me to stay past curfew," they'll give you permission to do that, and as long as you keep to a strict schedule, it's fine. But where I was going with all this was, I think the parole and probation officers are looking to violate people. But I mean, is that written somewhere? I don't know. It's my casual observation working with these people for the past 10 years. The violation is always worse than the actual crime, short of murder.
See, and yet, and I know that when this airs, I can already practically hear, way off in the gorgeous state of Utah, Robert Winfrey rolling his eyes at what I'm about to say.
It doesn't take much.
There's a certain relative aspect where you look at what some of the other characters have had to endure when they've gotten out, and then you kind of look at privileged white Piper, and you kind of at the same time want to want to go, okay, first off, everybody you were in prison with has it a whole lot worse off than you.
Look at Tasty. They did the early release thing with Tasty, and she was back within, a month or two? She had nowhere to go.
Yeah.
She immediately had to return to crime. I mean, it is...
Right.
It is an endless circle for a lot of people. They don't have, Go ahead.
Well, and the thing you have to remember is... And I'm gonna sidetrack here for a second to recall something, because it's kind of along the same lines. I remember reading once that after Robert Downey Jr. went to prison on drug charges, he reflected on it later and said something to the effect of, and I may get this quote slightly wrong, so forgive me. There's no way you can go to prison and it's either come out a liberal or come out a Democrat. Which, fair point. I get where he's coming from. He's trying to say that that the harshness of prison was a wake-up call to him, and it's something that's necessary, and fair point for him. I get that. The thing about that is, though, is much like Piper, Robert both went in and came out with a separate set of advantages at his disposal. Number one, middle-aged, handsome white guy. Number two, actor with a pretty healthy resume. He was able to get out and kind of, he still had at least a hell of a lot more money than Piper or Tasty did when they got out of the joint to his name. Certainly had some more connections that could get him some kind of work, even if they weren't exactly the kind of plum roles that he maybe deserved. But he had more going for him inherently than, these people who just kind of have the odds stacked against them from the second the prison gate closes behind them, and they're all of a sudden on the outside. And if we're looking at Piper, yeah, you could say, oh well, look at all she's got to endure, though. She's got to start over. Yes, but the fact is, she also kind of fucked herself with the actions that put her in prison in the first place, because those are the ones, along with her kind of cozying up to Alex, that alienated her from her family in the first place and left them probably as, such a persona non grata, such a shunned pariah, that they just refused to help her, even when she was making her best effort. And yeah, I won't say it's always fair, but speaking as someone who's been in a not dissimilar situation, I can kind of understand where they were coming from and how this is another extension of Piper did it to herself.
Right.
So it's yet one last instance of it being really hard to feel sorry for her. Although I also gotta say, and I'm curious to hear your comparison, about 60 seconds. That is about how long it took before I wanted Thanos to pop up in the lower right-hand corner of my screen with an infinity gauntlet, take one look over his shoulder at Cal and Neri, and just say, yikes, 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 yikes. Hang on, guys. I'm going to fix this for you right now. I apologize. No world should have to endure these people. And then just snap.
What's funny is Genji Cohen kind of editorializing about that lifestyle and those kinds of people, which you would think she would be highly supportive of. Like, the yuppie, hippie kind of, Whole Foods recycling crowd. Like, you would think Genji Cohen would be like, yeah, these are the like, she made them, not the brother as such. She just neutered him. Not that he had a tremendous amount of balls to begin with. He went from slacker to eunuch in one series. So it's like, okay, whatever. But the wife is kind of a shrew, and she's unsympathetic. And you're like, okay, what are you trying to tell us, Genji? Have you just about had it with your own people? It's funny. I see this more and more with a lot of female comedians who come out with kind of a point of view, and then years later they realize how silly that point of view is, and are tired of everybody in that circle with that point of view. Mm-hmm. Like they age out of it almost.
I don't think it's just female comedians. I think it's people of all stripes. Mm-hmm. I mean, Lord knows I was having this conversation just the other day with my good friend Scarlett about just how much my views have changed from the time I was in my mid to late 20s to here I am now at 36. But that being said, I do have a comparison for you. You have to make a choice. Thanos has apparently the weakest ass Infinity Gauntlet in the world, and he realizes, I don't know, maybe instead of Infinity Stones, he just laced some runts or sweet tarts in there. But enough sugary, sweet and sour, flavor-packed goodness that he can snap exactly one individual out of existence. Which one do you have him choose? Do you have him snap out the world's biggest granola stuffed chucklehead, or the world's greatest soup eater? Which one do we eradicate from existence?
Yeah, it's a rough one. But I said at the onset with Piper, I wish they had done a little bit more with her this season than just moderately struggle with having to stay in a confined space. When she does that rant about how she just wants a day off, I honestly was expecting her to go back to prison for it. Like, I feel like they copped out of the story because she gets away with it. And yeah, she kind of tightens up, the second half of the season. It becomes more about her. It becomes more about yet another love triangle with her, the redheaded gal, and Piper Voss. But I just, and this is what I want to get your reaction on. I just don't feel like Piper's story was particularly strong. I thought when they showed Tasty out, they made it a point to say life is hard when you get out of prison. We've made it almost an uphill slog at 90 degrees. And this needs to change if we really want to help these people, or do we just want to continue to create this revolving door of inmates? That story was much better told with Tasty. With Piper, there was an opportunity for them to tell a story about the difficulties of getting prison reform. They do a little bit of dealing with the stigmatism of having been an inmate, because sometimes, again, not everyone that breaks the law is a bad person. Not everyone that's in jail is necessarily guilty. It's a lot of perspective and point of view and circumstances that go into this sort of thing. And I feel like they dropped the ball on it. So, what do you think?
I would agree. I think it's a shame that you could almost sum up, in a certain sense, Piper's attitude about getting out as "fuck you, got mine."
Right.
It's like the instant she stepped outside of prison, she all of a sudden forgot about everything she'd seen, everything she had been through, everyone she had met, everyone that she and her fellow inmates had lost unnecessarily along the way, and just toddles off on her way. Mm-hmm. It just felt like she came away really no greater for her experience.
I wouldn't go that far. I think in the beginning she's towing the line and she's trying to be respectful and she's not necessarily a shrill and entitled person the way she started out to be. But I do agree that a lot of the lessons she learned in prison she did leave behind. It was like she learned how to be meek. That was the lesson that stayed with her, which isn't that interesting of a story. And then she goes back to being entitled, and just to wrap this up so we can move on to something else. And then at the end of it, she has an opportunity to choose a new life and to really make something of herself. And instead, they show like there's one little bit of her in a class, and they kind of show I think one of the textbooks that alludes to activism of some kind. But I would have preferred that being a season arc, not a one, part of a montage.
Well, see, but therein lies exactly my point. Is yes, you can say that she learned something, but then what good is knowledge if it's never put to use?
I know, and then so she chooses Voss at the end of this. That's where I was getting to. She has an opportunity between this new life with this new woman and really better herself, and instead she's going to go back to the same. Look, Voss is, in a lot of ways a better character than Piper, but I don't know what Genji was trying to say here with the decisions in the writing. Let's choose the person currently still in prison because love is more important than everything else. Is that the message? If that is the message, it did not resonate with me.
No, it really didn't.
Maybe we're not the audience for this, but whoa, was that lost on me?
Yeah.
I do want to briefly mention Tasty and what she goes through. She's found guilty on all accounts, and I think it's a life sentence for the incidents in the riot and for killing the one guard allegedly, which she didn't actually do. So her friends have betrayed her. She feels alone in the world. She beats up Madison twice, which, by the way, just as a side thing, I was like, if I have to put up with another season of, she's gone. Terrific. I was so happy to see Madison gone. Like, thank God we dealt with this early. I could actually sit down and enjoy the season now because I couldn't take much more of her. But anyway, Tasty's big arc in this is I'm angry. I want to kill myself. Well, I can't kill myself just yet, so I have to go through this elaborate plot to kill several episodes before I can get around to myself. Oh, life's worth living even if you're in prison forever. Okay.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not suggesting like she should have killed herself. That would be a horrible thing to say. But we are creating a drama here. We are talking about the realities of prison life. Maybe her killing herself might have sent a stronger point. I mean, this is a thing that happens. I even though I've been out of work for 2 months, I still get the emails. We had 2 guys try to kill himself this week. It happens.
Yeah, that was one arc. And don't get me wrong, Tasty was one of my favorite characters the entire series. The length and breadth of it, the whole way. But the fact is, it feels like a little bit of kind of a forced happy ending, for a main character. Which I'll make the distinction with what I'm talking about, because what they did with several characters really annoyed me in a this is the thanks they get kind of way. But yeah, I mean, there almost would have been a message to be sent of sort of, I feel like this is the only way they're ever going to listen. This is the only way anything ever might actually change, and I've got nothing left. So I might as well. Is it the super happy Scooby-Doo ending? No, it isn't. But on the other hand, again, it would also be one that wouldn't feel like they were trying to force something happy, and it was also kind of a way to shoehorn in one last salute to Poussey, too.
Mm-hmm.
which was what it really ended up feeling like. Which I get. She's an important character. She's one whose fictional charity even inspired the creation of an actual social justice fund. How often does that happen?
Right.
From a fictional series? But still, even that notwithstanding, it felt like one more way they kind of wanted to just drive home one more nod to this beloved character.
Mm-hmm.
And granted, it was a very sweet flashback. I'm not gonna say it wasn't moving, but I'm also not gonna say it was exactly opaque either. It was pretty transparent, and I would almost say bordering on fan service.
Let's talk about, this is going to require some time here, so I want to get to it now. Let's talk about the immigration angle. Just the whole, the whole breadth of it. This mostly concerns Blanca Maritza, who returns after being off the previous season. She was in Ohio.
I'm just gonna say, if there were an actual breathing, eating, crapping, flesh and blood personification of this angle, I would be side-eyeing it right now and just saying, this motherfucker right here.
I'm actually surprised they didn't keep mentioning the president just like every chance they got. It's like I feel like in a first draft of the scenes dealing with this angle, there was a lot of that, and somebody said, "You're gonna get us kicked off of Netflix. Knock it off."
Oh, fuck.
But yeah, look. So this mostly deals with Blanca and Maritza, and then the kitchen crew, which is Gloria, Red, Nichols. I think Maria's there at one point. I can't remember who else is part of that group. There's some other characters loosely associated with this. Which, by the way, just as an aside, Nichols, her whole angle in this thing is first she's dealing with an Egyptian gal who has had, I think, some mutilation of her vagina, and then Red's Alzheimer's / dementia that's developing is a big part of that whole angle. But I mentioned the whole Nichols thing because there's a scene in here where the Egyptian girl's explaining why she really doesn't want Nichols messing with her privates, and and the shame inherent in all of that, and just isn't this is a terrible thing? We're drawing attention to it. Fine, I'm fine. I don't want to give too much away here because we still have yet to talk about it, but boy, I got scared when in Glow they started going down the same angle with a couple of characters, and they quickly veered out of that lane into something else. But I'm looking at that going, hey, Genji, are you running out of ideas? Really? Two back-to-back shows with the same thing? All right. Back to the main topic at hand. So the whole thing here is this was the big editorialization of our current immigration policy. I don't want to really talk about it's hard to talk about this and not talk about the politics of it. I don't want to. I'll just present the argument because I don't really want to get into a debate about that. But the argument essentially is that people are welcome to come here legally. However, it's incredibly difficult. It's expensive. Some people are able to do it. And the ones that come illegally, this isn't a pretty picture. Terrible things happen trying to cross the border illegally. People get hurt, people get killed, and they're taking that risk because where they're coming from is such a horrible place for them that they're willing to take being hurt and being killed for the promise of possibly a better life. Oh, and by the way, when they get here, there's a good chance they're going to get messed with as well. But it's better than where they came from, and at least there's a chance. There's a promise, something along those lines. On the other hand, you don't break the law. That's it. That's basically the argument. That's a very elementary presentation of it, but that we're not here to discuss the immigration policy. So coming out of that is a president and a federal government that says, okay, we're really going to hard look at this issue, and we're going to do something about it. We're going to start finding the people who broke the law, whether they've gone on to contribute or not. We're not really drawing a distinction anymore. However you got here, if you got here illegally, you have to go. And it results in some pretty sketchy things. You've got this immigration detention center where which is the setting of this editorialized storyline. You have the courtroom where they kind of show you how that goes, and it's pretty sketch too. They show you that in some cases the children are put on trial as well, and they have no representation and don't understand why they're there, which I thought was illegal, but apparently isn't. So it's kind of like this window into this world that is the result of at least 51% of the country going, stop breaking the law and get out of the country. Do it right. We don't care how hard things are for you. Now that I've got that out of my system. I liked the kind of contrast and like the hopelessness that Blanca was initially coming to the table with the hopefulness brought in by the ever pretty, ever gorgeous Diane Guerrero, who even when she's made down to look like a prisoner, is still the hottest thing walking.
God, yes.
Oh my God! If you should ever either sign up for DC Universe, HBO Max, or just able to find it on Kodi, watch Doom Patrol just for her. She's just amazing. Anyway, so the first couple of episodes are them trying to figure out their circumstances, kind of show you the world. There's a lot of world building, which is typically something we use with fictional
Spoiler:
places.
It is neither shining, shimmering, nor splendid.
There's a lot of world building, which again is something we typically use in a lot of high fantasy, but this is a world most of us are never going to see. You're born in this country, odds are, you're not going to end up in an immigration detention center, so you're never going to see this sort of thing. So they have to kind of set that up for a while, and there's a lot of that going on. There's a sort of the inherent. They start poking at the inherent unfairness of how they get people. Maritza thinks she's born in the United States, but she doesn't have her ID on her, so she gets arrested in the club, and she's presumed to be illegal. Turns out she is. That sort of thing. Then you have Blanca, who had a green card, but it got revoked unbeknownst to her. So those are the kind of stories they're playing with. Meanwhile, you have these other ladies that have been detained, and they are contributors. They've done nothing wrong, but they happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and they got detained and are being sent away despite so there's that contrast also, where you have the criminals and then you have the non-criminals, and how being a criminal in this country on top of being an illegal has made it so much harder for people who are just trying to live and have done nothing wrong short of getting into the country illegally. There's a lot of that. So on the one hand, I liked what they were attempting to do. I liked that we got out of the prison that we had known all this time for the previous 6 seasons, and we got to see something different, got to see a different experience. I thought the show as a platform for that sort of thing worked really, really well. All the actresses involved, from the Egyptian to I think she's from El Salvador, the gal that ends up befriending Blanca. We have an Indian gal who ends up being pregnant, but she was raped, and so she wants an abortion, and all kinds of horribleness happens to her. I liked the interplay. I liked the performances. I think my problem, and I'll let Sean sort of butt in here now, is, as I said to you offline, I just thought the tenor of the discussion being had a bit too shrill for my liking. There was a way of handling this without feeling like the viewer is being hit over the head, or we're all so dumb that this has to be dumbed down so we can understand it. And maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe most people watching this are too dumb and really need it brought down to a third grade level. But I guess I didn't, and I can only speak from my perspective. I felt like the writing was, the editorializing was way too shrill, way too preachy and direct, and needed to be edited and toned down just a bit.
Okay, so first of all, I'll acknowledge something. plenty of insane shit has happened over the past about 3 years that just prior to November 2016, you couldn't have made up if you tried. So I get that a lot of this stuff is hard to depict somewhat honestly without seeming over the top. In a way, our political climate of the past 3 years has murdered satire. Because just you can neither... Some of this stuff is impossible to exaggerate much further than reality. And even then, when you do exaggerate, it gets to the point where you have to admit, no, it's still actually pretty plausible. So, there's that. But, Mark, I got a question for you. You and I, as nerds, we are aficionados of fiction in many forms. In the best of scenarios, what kind of happens in terms of fictional characters once they're created, once they become popular, once they captivate an audience? What kind of happens to their nature?
I think in many cases, their nature ends up changing to benefit the widest audience possible to the point where they're nigh recognizable.
Not exactly what I was going for, but actually still true. They kind of take on a life of their own. And they sort of cease to become fictional characters and sort of take on this place as people and figures that the audience actually relates to. That they develop an actual abiding affection for. Sometimes that's on par with real-life loved ones. They just kind of evolve and transcend being made up, figments of someone's imagination. That being said, this is one of a couple attempts to address a topical issue that brings back characters whose arcs were seemingly ended on somewhat satisfying notes the previous season, just so they can hammer home these points. I mean, in Maritza's case, what you have to consider is, at the end of last season, she got out. She was a free woman. I mean, and she was a very likable woman. One of the people we arguably kind of felt somewhat sorry for the fact that she was locked up, despite the fact that she was legitimately a criminal. But she had seemingly done her time and was on her way to go try to move on with her life. Good for her. They basically brought her back this season just so they could exile her again.
They needed to give the movement, the issue, a pretty face.
Who among the writers did Maritza piss off? Who did Danielle, bless her, piss off or Diane rather? Danielle Guerrero is the name of a good friend of mine. I'm sorry, Danny. Love you, honey. Who did Diane Guerrero piss off that they actually brought her? It's the equivalent to, you hear sometimes a fictional character say, I hate him so much, I wish I could bring him back to life just so I could kill him again.
I'm actually wondering if her schedule for Doom Patrol or whatever else she was doing got interfered with her, because I think she's like an in-demand actress now.
That's but I don't get it. I mean, you wrapped her arc up in such a nice fashion. It was perfect. It suited her level of involvement in the show. It was something nice for the people who were actually kind of rooting for her. It was a good way to send her out. But then in typical Genji Cohen fashion, someone just didn't know when to stop. And you bring this character back. You even show her pretty much happily living the high life, not breaking any laws. In fact, making the right decision to abide by her parole so she could keep her nose clean and not run off to L.A. with the basketball player with the Make-A-Wish dick. And then only to just have her sent right back to Colombia. What the hell? What did that accomplish? And even Blanca ultimately turned out to be quite likable. And they did the same thing to her. Except in her case, it was more like, let's bring her back so we can keep kicking her while she's down.
She at least has somewhat of a redemptive arc, though. I mean,
you are taking characters and you're turning them into a means to shout your message into a bullhorn. That just feels disrespectful to people you've invested the last 7 years in.
Yeah.
I mean, and granted, yes, I know we're talking about characters, but creators love the figures that rise from their imaginations. I remember Thomas Harris was once talking about how I think he was saying that he considered himself to be done with Hannibal Lecter after he wrote Hannibal. But then, as he once put it, he said the character just kind of kept insisting to him and kind of talking to him and trying to urge him back. It really is a personification. Or how, in Wes Craven's New Nightmare, Wes talks about how there hadn't been any new movies because he hadn't had any nightmares in a while. And how that kind of allowed Freddy to kind of creep back into reality because nobody was really afraid of it. I think if I remember right, I should remember because that's one of my all-time favorite movies. Because his dreams weren't keeping Freddy imprisoned in fiction. In a world where somebody could say you aren't real. And so, man, what kind of bastard do you have to be to spend 7 years crafting these characters, previously in 6 seasons, crafting these characters' arcs, seemingly bring them to an end, and then come season 7, realize, no, you know what? We haven't taken a flying diarrhea dump on Donald Trump in 5 minutes. Hey, I know. Let's bring these side characters back that everybody seemingly liked and just demoralize them for about 13 more episodes.
For those listening to this, let me say this. You're not going to get me and Sean talking about the pros and cons of the Trump presidency. Boy, am I not doing that here. I may never do it. But I want you to understand. I want people to understand while listening to this that these issues were here before Donald Trump. They will be here long after Donald Trump. The fact that he chose to run on some of them and then got duly, we won't say duly. He got elected president shrewdly. He was shrewdly.
Shrewdly, yes. I support that. I endorse that term for it.
He was shrewdly elected president because of it. Whatever. People want to be mad about that for the next 4 years, which there's going to be another 4 years. That's on you. But I could take a little less yelling at... I had this problem with the Bush administration, too. It was a lot of people on one particular political spectrum all pointing at one boogeyman who had inherited a bunch of problems from the previous administration and created a bunch of new ones. That's kind of being president. Ronald Reagan inherited a bunch of problems from his predecessors. A few of his predecessors. Created some new ones. Kind of just went along like that. Bill Clinton, same thing. Bush, same thing. Barack Obama, the same thing. President Trump, same thing. The singular, what I'm saying is the pointing to of a singular boogeyman by producers and writers and actors in Hollywood is the dumbest thing ever, and I wish it would stop.
Oh, but wait. This particular body count doesn't just stop at Zaza and Blanca. No, of all the people you had to bring back to shit down their necks, you then chose to do the same thing with Caputo and Fig so that you could respectively deliver equally heavy-handed, obnoxious diatribes about the Me Too movement and abortion. God, you want to talk about a couple that, and not only that, but let's pick this apart a little bit further. You took Fig and really altered the metal of her character. Not her character as in, like her courage and conviction, but her character as in her identity as who she is. Just for the sake of this message. She goes from a woman who never wanted kids to all of a sudden we get a cheeky, pun intended, introduction to the fact that now suddenly she's doing fertility treatments in order for her and Caputo to conceive a baby that she ultimately aborts anyway. What in the Smurfy ass fuck?
Oh, Sean, we're making change their mind.
That's not my point.
I know, but somebody out there is thinking it, so I voiced it.
Yes, they can. In many cases, they don't. But the bigger thing that I'm getting at is you're just conveniently altering that very key aspect of her background, of her emotional makeup, just for the sake of, oh, been a while since we busted this one out, message!
All right. Let me take a pause here for just a minute and 30 seconds to tell you about a little app that I like to use called Podcoin. Hey, everybody. I really do hope you love the Radulich Broadcasting Network. Did you know that you can actually get paid just for listening to this podcast? I know it sounds insane, but it's true. We just discovered this free new app called Podcoin, and it literally pays you to listen to podcasts. Here's how it works. You listen to podcasts, and you earn Podcoin while you listen. Then you turn that Podcoin in for gift cards at places like Amazon or Starbucks, or if you're a good person, you could even donate that Podcoin to charity. The more you listen, the more you earn. Here's what you do. Download the app right now on iPhone or Android, and I have a special code for you. Simply use our code MARKWED5. That's capital M A R K W E D 5. Capital M A R K W E D 5. MARKWED5. And you'll get 300 Podcoin just for signing up. And if you listen to enough of us on there, you can get a cappuccino at Starbucks or an Amazon gift card on us. So go ahead and go listen to this podcast or virtually any podcast on Podcoin and sign up with code MARKWED5. I swear it'll change the way you listen to podcasts. Some messages, Sean. That's where we were.
Yeah. You're bringing characters back just so that you can either, literally do away with them again, or destroy everything. Have you? It's like that confirmed Batman editorial edict that no member of the Bat family is allowed to have a happy love life. Is this what we're going for here? And I I don't like saying that about Orange is the New Black, because they have taken on some topics that have needed to be discussed. And they've sometimes done so with just the right point on them, especially when we're talking about the state of private prison reform. One of my favorite moments in the series, when they kind of addressed some of the more crippling aspects of the gender gap, were McCullough's flashback to her military service. Mm-hmm. When she goes from becoming a hero among her men for getting them drunk and paying a Puerto Rican woman from another company to pretend to be a Muslim, to all of a sudden she's vilified because she's trying to sleep it off on the couch. One dude decides he's going to try to finger her. She gets up, screams at him, calls him a fucking douchebag, and the next day she's the bad guy.
Right.
I actually thought that sequence was rather well done. But this, though, this is arguably the show at its worst. I think the two storylines we just discussed deserve to go down as two of the lowest points of the series.
I think where Genji Cohen gets messed up is when the editorialization of a storyline or a topic doesn't serve the narrative very well. There's a delicate balance between telling an appropriate story and putting a message in there. And when the message becomes too much of the story and the story suffers because of it, that's where you're going to have people like me and Sean saying, you did bad here, fix it.
Hi, Supergirl. How you doing?
Oh, God. That last season. Woo!
I haven't even watched the last season. I've only watched as far as season 2.
Oh God! So if you like stories about illegal immigration, wait till you watch Supergirl season 4.
Ah, fuck me! I'm gonna learn to hate this show, aren't I?
Within 3 episodes. Like
3 episodes. Challenge accepted.
And I adore Supergirl and everything, but even this season, there were times when I was just like, really? Is this where we are now?
Supergirl, up to the point I've watched. Oh, let's see. Either season 2 or season 3 that I watched. I think it was season before last was the last one that I watched. Yeah, I love that show, but yeah, to kind of tie that into Orange is the New Black, I rolled my eyes at it for exactly the same reason. Just absolutely no subtlety.
No.
When it's trying to really get a point across.
No, all the subtlety of a hurricane of hammers. All right. Speaking of a hurricane of hammers, we've been at this for almost an hour. There is one major sort of winding plot line that I want to deal with, and then we'll do just good bad ugly, and then we'll be out. And that is the Daya/Aleda/drug storyline. So just as we got rid of Battison within an episode or two, thank God. We have Daddy, who is screwing around on Daya, and so Daya gives her a dosing of, I think it's bath salts, and she ends up overdosing and dies. So Daya, who is just trying to live out her life sentence for killing a guard, as high as humanly possible, but is approached by one of the gals who is trying to sell alcohol to the prison, saying, "Hey, let's join forces. Let's rebuild this gang on the grave of Daddy, and let's be powerful." And so they do, and Daya becomes like the big prison gang leader, dealing out drugs. On the other side of that, you have Aleda, who she got out a season or 2 before. She got out to find that her kids were in foster care, and so she's following the steps and trying to do what she needs to do, but she realizes that it's a rigged game, and so she says, fuck it, I'm going to find some poor schlub that I can manipulate and get him to sell drugs for me. And so she does, and it works. Hooray! But things often go as they do. They go off the track. She finds herself in hot water and eventually being arrested again because her kids are out of control, and she gets out of control, and eventually she violates her parole, and off she goes. So, as far as plot lines go, there were some funny exchanges of dialogue, some interesting little character bits here and there. Aleda is a truly horrendous human being. And I really wish she had got... This was one of those deals where, at like the end of an HBO series, which this resembles, there's always like one really shitty character who gets over on everybody else and wins. And I feel like, even though Aleda ends up back in prison, we end with her choking her daughter. And I'm like, how very HBO of you. What do you think?
You know what? I actually almost entirely forgot about that arc until you brought it up, because it seriously... It was one of the moments of the series that just fell flat to me. I think it's because it's been so many seasons since I've really given a shit about what happens to Daya.
Yeah. Kind of stopped caring about Daya after she gave away the baby.
Yeah, likewise. I think if I had to pinpoint, it would probably be around the same time. She just... She never really had all that interesting a backstory. There was nothing about her character that I exactly ever found especially appealing. Oh God, I'm blanking. I must be having half a stroke. What's the name of the crazy New Jersey girl? Who am I thinking of? The one that Nichols was so cozy with for so long?
Oh God. Yeah, Lorna, something or other.
Lorna, thank you. I mean, Laura was bugfuck nanners. But number one, the actress who plays her is adorable and charming. And number two, she was at least kind of amusing. I can at least give her credit for that much. I always found Red terribly interesting. I thought Jones was fairly sympathetic. I could find something identifiable that made me feel something about each character. Daya, just almost right from the beginning, just nothing. I didn't even particularly care about her getting knocked up by a guard and having to keep that secret. Even that wasn't really that big a deal to me. We're just season after season. Okay, let's go with wrestling reference number 2. She kind of was the Scotty 2 Hottie or Val Venus or Stevie Richards of the show. Where just at one point you're watching and you kind of do a double take and just go, "What the shit? You're still here?"
The story they're telling with her and Aleda is about generational abuse and neglect, and and how sometimes it's hard to get out of the circle of crime and violence and drugs, and so that's what that's all about. I mean, when we started the series, you had the white privileged girl, you had the black girl who was an athlete who went the wrong way, and then you had Daya, who the first thing she has to deal with is the fact that her mother's in prison as well.
See, yeah, okay, Washington, her backstory I loved.
Right.
She goes from she starts off as the little kid on the playground that the boys don't want anything to do with, because she's as athletic as they are, and she's proud of it. She's not weak and flimsy like the pretty girls. She gets to high school and it's pretty much the same deal. She's a star athlete, but no eyes are but no eyes are on her. She always wants something that's out of her reach instead of the riches that are right in front of her. It may be a simple, tried and true storyline, but it was one that worked for her, and it was one that I was invested in by the time she left the show. Daya, I don't know what it was, but something about the way any arc of hers played out that I just never gave a shit. I don't care. And I almost called her mother mierda, which is Spanish for shit. So not wrong. What? See, and again, I care about that character so little that I can't. It's been seconds since you talked about her, and I've already forgotten her name. And they took up so much of the show with her shit. Like, what an utter fucking waste.
Yeah.
Hell, you could have given Red one last turn in the spotlight. I liked Red, and I think there's something extremely relatable about depicting a woman who's always had such a sharp mind suddenly having to cope with the heartbreaking onset of Alzheimer's. Yeah, I would have been much more intrigued by that.
I'll tell you who I really like this season, and who we've talked. Look, she's an amazing actress. She's certainly for the series won or been nominated for dozens of awards, and she's definitely earned them. But I remember thinking about last season where I was like, ugh, this with you, I can't take it. But this season, now that they've had her on her meds and they wrote her a little bit more straight, Uza Aduba as Suzanne Crazy Eyes Warren she really does need to win an Emmy for this season.
I knew you were going to say Uzo Aduba or Taryn Manning. I knew it was going to be one of the two.
Yeah, I'll get to Pennsatucky in just a second. But I gotta focus on Crazy Eyes for just a minute, because while she does not have a major arc, she has some of the most poignant lines and performances in the entire season. Mm-hmm. And playing too much of her sort of adolescent, crazy, just juvenile behaviors from previous seasons got to me. And while she's I don't disagree with the nominations or awards she's won. I always found the character to be a bit exhausting. Mm. Not this season. This season, she's by far one of the bright shining stars. She's amazing.
Amen. Absolutely. One of my favorite moments of hers was when, I think it was in the second episode, when she's having that conversation with her adoptive mother.
Do I deserve to be here?
Yeah, directly asks her that, and her mother goes on, and I didn't feel like it was lip service. I didn't feel like it was blowing smoke up her ass. Goes on this speech about what the point is of her kind of being institutionalized, and then she just simply says back, "But I'm not there. I'm here."
Right.
And her mother just kind of, in that instant, almost doesn't necessarily hesitate, as it just kind of slowly dawns on her, my God, no, that this isn't where she belongs. She doesn't deserve to be here. And I would say that's an example of how you make a point about something like that without being shrieky about it.
Yeah. That was a high point of writing for this season.
Absolutely.
I'll tell you another person who was less deplorable this season than in previous seasons, even while she was not necessarily doing the right thing. Just the way that the actors handled the scenes and the performance was Black Cindy. What a story about, self-loathing. Because once she's once Tasty gets her revenge on her by writing her daughter a letter saying, "Oh, Cindy's your real mother," and just she just turns on its head her entire world, and then she has to deal with the consequences of that. But it's really the consequences of all her actions since high school. And this yet another entitled, bombastic, egotistical character takes a good look at herself in the mirror and says, "I don't deserve nice things." That broke my heart.
See, and I'll tell you, I remember saying a number of seasons back, I forget which season it was, but I voiced just my fed up frustration with Black Cindy, because I found her number one annoying, and number two, she existed as a caricature, not a character.
Right.
In my eyes.
Yeah, she was there to crack wise.
Exactly. The past 2 seasons, she evolved into a character to the point where, okay, let's go. You know what? It's our last Orange is the New Black podcast. We're going all out with the wrestling references. We're leaving it all on the floor here. It was like when Batista left WWE the first time. And he went from months upon months upon months of phoned-in performances to all of a sudden, he busts out the best promos and some of the best work of his career. And while it was fun to watch, I also sat there and, Alexis, if you ever ask her, can probably tell you, I yelled at the TV sometimes, "Dave, where the fuck has this been? You're busting this out now? When you're leaving?"
This was leather pants and vest Batista, right?
This was around the time when he was feuding with John Cena going into WrestleMania 26, and he cut one of my favorite promos ever. "You want some, come get some. You want some, come get some. You can't see me. You can't see me." and afterwards, the infamous, "I refuse to believe this wasn't a shoot." Duct tape? Really? Duct tape? It was some of the best work of his career, and it was when he had one foot out the door.
Right.
And it's kind of the way I feel about Black Cindy. Is here we are, season 6 and 7, and you actually start writing her as a person. Where was this the other 5? You might have actually had me giving more of a shit about her by this point. You might have had me caring more about her story. But no, you just kind of save it all for right now. And don't get me wrong, it was a great note to go out on in terms of what we were talking about, in terms of you don't always get the happy ending.
Since you brought her up, we'll talk about her now, and then we'll do a quick thing on best and least favorite parts of the season if we haven't already covered it, and then we'll do plugs. But yeah, Doggett, who started out as a villain on the show and has really developed into one of the most well-written characters on the show. Mm-hmm. And you want to talk about eliciting sympathy. Boy, nothing makes me feel like more guilt-ridden as a father than when I've gotten frustrated with my kids and I yell at them and they give me the same face that fucking Doggett gave when she was with her dad. And I wasn't nearly that bad. Like, I have to watch myself at times because I don't like, because it's the worst look ever, and I don't want my kids to look at me that way. But yeah, like every time they do a flashback with her, she has had the worst life. She's fucking people for Mountain Dew. Her dad's like yelling at her, calling her a dummy. We figured out with my kids early on that one of the problems they were having in school was neither one of them could see. That's because we're on top of things as parents. We make sure we get their eyes checked and we take them for proper testing. And when the teachers, say, "Hey, we've seen this thing about your kid," we're on it. We're actively getting things done, and we're trying to make their lives better. And then you see like the polar opposite of that, where the child's utterly neglected and basically just shy of feral. Mm-hmm. And she, it was just like she gets all the sympathy from me. It
is impossible to overstate the fantastic job that Taryn Manning has done really turning this character around.
Yeah.
In some surprisingly gradual ways from season to season, and doing so for quite a while as pretty much a side character.
I was going to say, like, she started off as kind of a caricature of, of the Southern Baptist type type person and villain, to the point where I think we talked about that when we first reviewed the series. We're like, this gal, there's a message here. But yeah, you're right. She got pushed to the back, and she became sort of background character. But she still had the best stuff.
See, it's a lot like what happened with Black Cindy, except they started it so much sooner. They gave her so much more runway for her to evolve and actually become redemptive by the time the series was over. And I had never really given much thought to Taryn Manning as an actress until I watched this series. Now I'm kind of intrigued to see what she's going to do next.
Yeah, I tell you, I was really heartbroken because part of her story this year is she goes to the GED class, and that's where she's discovered to be dyslexic, and then because of other ulterior motives, the teacher ends up issues and motives, the teacher ends up quitting, and it's fucking Loose Check takes over the class, who could not care less about anything. By the way, he has one redemptive moment in this where he takes the rap for Gloria and then just like quits, gets fired, and I was like, wow. Loose Check, who has been a piece of garbage for most of the series, one redemptive moment, and it worked. I was like, all's forgiven. You're absolved of all guilt, my son. Go in peace.
Yeah, he's just kind of sort of waddled between lovable idiot and like you kind of said, opportunistic, crooked piece of shit.
Yep. But like I said, he made that one sacrifice for Gloria, and I was like, I like you. You were absolved. Go in peace.
All right, so let's put a bow on this, and I'll
tell you my favorite thing about the season. My favorite bits consistently, where they never messed it up, and they had some of the best interactions, was Joe's group, where they I can't remember what he called it, but it led to like confrontations between victims and victimizers. And the highlight of this was when the one guard confronted Maria about the riot. And Maria, and then in such, and throughout that class, Maria sort of coming to grips with her own stuff, and then you start to see the flashbacks with her and the boyfriend, and all these mistakes that she's made, and the allusion to that's not really his kid. I really did. The therapeutic nature of talking things out with somebody, and them, and then making that a part of the season, I really enjoyed. I thought it was handled well. It was probably one of my favorite stuff of season 7.
Man, I'm trying to pick one favorite. I've spent so many times kind of controlled raving about what I haven't liked. Oh, what do I pick as my favorite? I gotta say, I'm just gonna kind of call it a general toss-up between Tucky and Cindy's arcs. Okay. Because they felt like refreshing, I don't know if I want to call it returns to form, or so much just turns toward what I wish the series had been more at times over the years. But it felt like it gave those characters some satisfying closure with some really admirable writing after years of kind of being treated as joke butts or being shoved off to the side. It was good to see them become a little bit ambitious toward the end. And as for worst, I think you can tell it's the combination of Maritza and Blanca's arc, and Caputo and Figs.
Yeah.
Because you shat on at least really well-liked, if not beloved characters, just because you had one more heavy-handed point that you had to drive home. Just generally speaking, my take is this is an overall satisfying season, but it's one that I wish they had shortened by almost half. Because that way you might not have had so much of the scrambling to fill episodes with some of these unnecessary plot arcs, and you would have zeroed things in a little more tightly on the storylines that actually matter.
Yeah, I agree. This could have dealt with maybe a 6-season shortened 6-episode shortened season. I mean, overall, I think my overall assessment of Season 7 is that it's uneven. It's a bit hit and miss. There's some really stupid stuff, like the whole Me Too thing, that's just handled poorly. The immigration stuff, which was shrill. But there were a lot of great individual performances. It's a weird thing that the lead got swallowed up in this entire show, to where I cared probably the least about her. And when I really started to get interested again, they didn't do anything with it. You know, we've already done This Is Hard, and getting out of prison with Tasty. I didn't need to see it with Piper. Like, let's move a little forward here. Like I said before, let's get her talking about the difficulty of prison reform, because that's a thing that does need to be addressed. People, I've got very conservative, in quotes, in-laws, and anytime I talk about prison reform, I mean, they do the Robert Downey rolling of the eyes thing. That meme. They just nobody cares. It's like I think we need to treat people humanely. Yeah, but they're criminals, so fuck them. All right, that's a tough argument to get around.
Well, but the problem with that is one of the most meaningful, thought-provoking things I've ever read. Was from a book called The Four Agreements, and it pointed out human beings are the only creatures on Earth that punish themselves multiple times for the same mistake, themselves and each other. And it happens just so many times over. Somebody fucks up, and we just can't let them live it down. Yeah. Really, what is the point for anybody to even bother trying to change if toward everybody else, that's always what they're going to be remembered for? Why should anybody even try? Why should anybody even try to be good in the first place when the standard is that unforgiving, that unrealistic?
Right. I've often said, if we're not going to forgive these people, if we're not going to give an opportunity for redemption, why don't we just kill them? It would be more humane and cheaper. Yeah. And it sounds like I'm being harsh, but the reality is if someone commits a crime and you just consistently beat them down and you force them into committing crimes again, how is that any less humane than? How is that any more humane than just putting a bolt in their head and being done with it? At least the suffering ends. We seem to enjoy suffering in this country a whole lot, and we seem to want to make each other suffer a whole lot, and it's a hard thing for me to wrap my head around.
It's trite, but it's true. Misery loves company. If we're miserable, nothing breaks our heart like seeing somebody else who's happy. So there's always a desire to drag someone down to our level. We view anybody who tries to strive for some positivity in their life or to maintain a consciously positive outlook on something as just this perpetual annoyance.
Yeah.
Because they won't shit talk, they won't tear anybody down. They try not to be two-faced. They always try to look for the best thing they can possibly say at the time. They're directing their attention toward what they want to see rather than focusing on just what they don't like. They choose to be for something instead of being, constantly shouting about what they're against. And for some reason, to a lot of people, that's just obnoxious as hell.
Yeah. So, all right. I'm going to give you the last word on this, so we don't, end with a depressing ending.
Okay. I do have a positive word about this, about Orange is the New Black as a whole, and it also contains one last wrestling reference. The thing to remember is that not just among Netflix, but among all streaming shows, this is the Bret Hart or Shawn Michaels of this medium. And by that analogy, you might as well look at network and traditional cable shows as being like the Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage, Ultimate Warrior mold. The big Goliaths who were the absolute standard for quality that everything has to live up to. They kind of wrote the script for how things are meant to be done. And when it comes to streaming shows now, every single success, ranging from a Gretzko, Castlevania, and the Voltron and She-Ra reboots on Netflix, all the way over to Castle Rock and Handmaid's Tale over on Hulu, and Jack Ryan and Good Omens over on Amazon. This was the show that broke the mold in terms of creativity, in terms of production quality, for what a streaming series could achieve. And it showed that a show on a streaming network could hang in there and produce something that is every inch, second for second, as watchable and compelling as anything that you'll find on a traditional broadcast or cable network. This was the one that first really started snatching up major Emmy nominations. If not for this show, a lot of the other shows we love on Netflix, we wouldn't get. If not for Orange is the New Black, I would dare say we don't get a Stranger Things. That doesn't happen. No Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. That probably gets lost in the shuffle over at NBC and gets maybe a half-season run, I would imagine.
I suspect Harlots doesn't migrate from the BBC over to Hulu.
No, damn sure wouldn't. You wouldn't have a network that would also be positioned as the kind of go-to when a series is kind of canceled before its time. The first thing people ask now, it used to be, are you going to make a movie? Fuck you, Serenity. I hate you so much sometimes for that. Don't look at me like that, Carrie. You know why I feel that way. I have explained this. It's a good movie, but you know why I feel that way. To now, the first question is, Netflix? Does Netflix want it? Does Netflix want it? Hell, when the creators of The Good Place announced, we're ending the show after season 4, this is our decision, this is always the way we wanted to go out. Do you think Netflix will save it? What about Hulu? No. Maybe I need to explain this to you with puppets. It was their choice. They don't want to do the show anymore. movie. But that's the way it's gone now. This was their huge moment. I think Hemlock Grove and oh God, help me out here. The show starring Steve Van Zandt, where he was a mobster in Witsec, and he was relocated to some remote village in Norway. What was the name of it? Now I've got to look it up. Because I mean, yeah, those had been successes before. I mean, okay, yeah, yeah. I thought it was Lilyhammer, much more so than Hemlock Grove. But Orange is the New Black was the one that I think really got Netflix mentioned in the same echelon as they can compete in terms of production value with the likes of NBC and HBO or USA or any other network. That was a huge achievement. It was groundbreaking. Creatively, was it always perfect? No, not really. But if you're to stack up the good versus the bad of the series over the course of 7 seasons, which is an admirable run for even a broadcast show, the good absolutely dwarfs the bad. And I highly recommend anybody who never has going back and watching all 7 seasons.
And you can go back and listen to our reviews of the previous seasons of Orange is the New Black. I don't remember what season we picked this up with, but we've done
Orange is the New Black. We started with the first season.
Did we?
I think. I could have. We did.
Maybe. But either way, we've been doing. Sean and I have been reviewing the series pretty much. Definitely the last couple of seasons for a while now, and a little sad to see it go for that reason. But we still have Glow and whatever else Genji Cohen pulls out of her butt. So, with that said, Sean, what do you got going on? Where are you streaming and podcasting these days?
Oh, I am so glad you asked. First of all, for updates on all of the above, as well as a stream of just about constant rants of these days, music and Overwatch. You can follow me on Twitter at Comer Codex. I'm on there most of the day, all the time. Fun fact, a little funny anecdote. About 2 days ago, I, as usual, woke up about 4 a.m. First thing I did, grab my phone, glance at Twitter. While I'm glancing on it, still about a quarter of awake, little blue bar flashes upon my phone. John Cena is now following you. Wait, what? I go and check, and matter of fact, yeah, there's the little blue check mark. There's everybody following John Cena that you would expect to be following John Cena. Apparently his account just went on a random following spree and my number came up. In my infinite wisdom, I then kind of made the remark at one point, so help me, if DDP Yoga starts following me, I'm going to have Carrie check that I have not indeed suffered a stroke. Well, last night during a 6-hour Twitch stream, while I wasn't paying attention, Diamond Dallas Page himself liked that tweet, and DDP Yoga is now following me on Twitter. Words are magic, people. Words are magic. So that's that. Anyway, speaking of Twitch, I stream on Twitch Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday night, currently from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. Central Time. Schedule might be changing now that the kiddo is back in school. About 3 days a week, that's usually me playing competitive Overwatch. Monday nights are Murder Mondays. over at twitch.tv/Comer Codex, where I play Dead by Daylight for about the same amount of time. And as of recently, I have been making a real push to try to get as many people as possible to donate to RAIN, the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. Cause that, due to certain circumstances over the past couple of weeks, has become even more near and dear to my heart than it already was. So if nothing else, even if you don't send some bits my way, even if you don't subscribe, I would urge you, please bop over to my Twitter. You'll find the link to my fundraising page right there next to my name. Please go to it and drop in whatever you can to help one of the most worthy of worthy causes. And otherwise, yeah, that's about it. Lots of time on Twitter and a little bit of time over on Twitch.
All right, tomorrow Sean will also be joining Sean Garmer and I at tomorrow night here on the Radulich Broadcasting Network to review Glow Season 3. We're on Patreon now, so that's patreon.com/Radulich, where you'll be finding exclusive content. A lot of the archival stuff's going to get moved over there. Some Screaming Boy. Starting with Jupiter Ascending this Friday, our movie watch-alongs are going to be on Patreon. So, we're going to split up some of the content hither and thither. It'll be exclusive to Patreon supporters, because apparently that's how you do that. So I hope you'll all check that out. Like I said, in the meantime, we've got a Lost in Space TV party this Saturday, and then live coverage of Cormier versus Mayochik. Next week is Saga of the Swamp Thing, the TV show from DC Universe, Thy Art is Murder. And then Sean and I are back here Thursday night to review, or during the day, depending on when Sean's available. We'll do an on-trial for the 1982 Swamp Thing, where Sean will be prosecuting and I will be defending. And then Friday night, we've got a TV party for Good Omens, speaking of streaming shows. And then during the day, on Saturday the 24th, Robert Winfrey and I will be doing boxing coverage of Sergey Kovalev versus Anthony Yard on ESPN Plus for the WBO World Heavyweight, for the WBO Light Heavyweight Championship. Sunday, again, will be a Patreon exclusive. Will be the Screaming Boy podcast. We'll be looking at D23. And then finally, we end the month of August, and I end my 2-month hiatus from work. Thank God. I never thought I'd be so happy to go back to work again. DC First, Superman Lobo, Krypton Season 2, Rage of Light Imploder. Alexis Haina and Jason Teasley will be joining me for a TV party on the Banana Splits movie from Sci-Fi. And then Saturday, right after NXT UK TakeOver Cardiff ends, Pat Mullen and I will give it a quick review, just in time for you to then turn on AEW All Out. All the way out, baby. I'm all the way out. And that takes us into September, which I'll tell you about when we get closer to September. September, baby. September. All right. For Sean Comer, this has been TV Party Tonight covering Orange is the New Black Season 7. Be well, be safe, and for the love of God, stay out of prison.